This lesson's going to show you the one part of any paragraph that's worth the most marks. Once you know what this part is, you can focus on it and finally start getting good marks in the comprehending section.
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
Hold it right there. There is literally no point in doing this lesson if you have not completed the previous lesson, the lesson on planning. If you have not completed that lesson, completed the related activities, don't bother watching this lesson. It builds off of everything we learned in that other one. This lesson's going to focus on how we can use the information from the first 5 planning steps to structure our response. Lesson objectives. Firstly, we will outline the elements of TEEL. I bet you were thinking I was going to come up with some fancy version of it. I'm not. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. TEEL works. It's a thing for a reason. Let's stick with it. We'll emphasize the importance of the explain part of TEEL, explain the guiding principle of structuring a response in the comprehending section, define paragraph break, outline how to determine whether you should use a paragraph break, illustrate the relevance of paragraph breaks to the planning steps, then illustrate an analogy. From there, we'll analyze past WACE exam questions, complete step 6 of example 1, step 6 of example 2, step 6 of example 3, step 6 of example 4, step 6 of example 5, step 6 of example 6. And then we'll outline a simple summary. Let's start off with the elements of TEEL. Some people use other versions of TEEL like TEET. I think TEEL is a bit more appropriate. We're going to go with that. The structure of any response you write in the comprehending section is based on the following elements. Firstly, we have the T of TEEL, which is a topic sentence or thesis statement. Then we have the elaboration. From there, an example. After that, an explain. And then we have a link. Together, these beautiful elements are known as TEEL. If TEEL was a person, I would give it a big hug. I love TEEL. Let's discuss what each of these elements mean in a little bit more depth, just to make sure we're on the same page. I'm sure you already have a pretty decent understanding of them, but it's very easy to confuse some of them. For instance, the elaboration and the explain, and some people have different versions of it. So here is my version of it, and here is the version that I strongly encourage you to use. Let's focus on the topic sentence or thesis statement first. This is your first sentence of a comprehending section response, and it should do the following. Firstly, it should state your position on the question, which is a thesis statement. Secondly, it should outline what the paragraph will be focusing on, and that is the topic sentence. So to be clear, the reason why the T is topic sentence / thesis statement is because in the comprehending section, this T represents a hybrid of both. It is both the topic sentence and thesis statement. Whereas in something like the responding section, those two things, the thesis statement and the topic sentence, would be split. Moving on to our next element of TEEL, it is the elaborate. This part of TEEL requires you to elaborate on anything you didn't articulate in the topic sentence or thesis statement. For instance, if stating your position on the question and outlining what the response will be focusing on makes your sentence overly long, this is where you could consider breaking it up into 2 sentences and have the main stuff in your topic sentence and thesis statement, and then the second sentence in your elaboration. The second sentence is elaborating on what you have said in the topic sentence / thesis statement. Importantly, if you have nothing to elaborate on, if you're able to address those main parts of the question, you're able to outline what your position to the question is and what your response will be focusing on in this first part of TEEL, then the elaboration isn't necessary. Next part of TEEL is the example. As we know from the lesson on how to use textual evidence in analytical responses, the type of textual evidence depends on the type of text that you're analyzing. For a written text or a written element of a multimodal text, you'll be referring to relevant quotes. On the other hand, for a visual text or a visual element of a multimodal text, you'll be using meta-language to describe the relevant evidence. In short, in the example part of TEEL, you will be referring to quotes and or meta-language. The explain part of TEEL requires you to do 3 things. Firstly, it requires you to explain the relevant language features used in the evidence. Secondly, it requires you to explain the effect of the evidence. Thirdly, it requires you to explain how that effect is relevant to your thesis or the question. And finally, we have the link. The link is where you summarize what you've discussed and then link it to your thesis. The link essentially just involves writing a reworded and more concise version of the topic sentence and thesis statement. Okay, we have gone through each element of TEEL. We've provided a bit of an explanation as to what each one means. Now I'd like to touch on the importance of the explain part of TEEL. In short, the explain part of a TEEL analytical paragraph is where most marks are awarded. Naturally, you'd be wondering why. Why is the explain part where you get most marks? Basically, the comprehending section and responding section require you to analyze texts. To analyze something means to examine it in detail. The explain part of TEEL is practically the only part that directly involves examining a text in detail. The topic sentence / thesis and the elaboration parts of TEEL, the TE parts of TEEL, require you to state your position on the question and outline what your paragraph will discuss. It doesn't analyze. The example part of TEEL involves either inserting a quote or describing part of a visual or multimodal text using meta language. It doesn't analyze. The link part of TEEL involves very briefly summarizing what you've discussed. It doesn't analyze. The explain part of a TEEL paragraph involves explaining the effect of the evidence and how that's relevant to your thesis. It does analyze. We know the what. The what is, the explain is the most important part. We know the why. We know why the explain is the most important part. The next question is the how. How can I demonstrate to a WACE marker that I know the explain is the most important part, so in turn, I can get the most marks? Simple answer to this question is to apportion most words in your paragraph to that element of TEEL. Apportioning most words in your paragraph to the explain element of TEEL could look like the following. We could apportion 15% of our total response to the thesis and topic sentence. We could apportion another 15% to the elaboration. 20% could go to the example, 40% would go to the explain, and the remaining 10% would go to the link. I want to emphasize that this breakdown is almost impossible to follow precisely. If you've got a 200-word response, it's very, very hard to make sure that 30 words are going to be from this, another 30 from this, 40 from this, 80 from this, and then another 20 from that. So the main point of this exercise here is to emphasize that most of your effort in a comprehending section response should be directed towards the explain. This is because in the comprehending section and responding section, your job is to analyze a text, and in a TEEL paragraph, the explain does most of the analyzing. That is a wrap on our discussion of TEEL and the importance of the explain part of TEEL. Now, let's discuss the guiding principle of structuring a response in the comprehending section. And that guiding principle is, a drum roll, paragraph breaks. Let me explain. The classic use of TEEL is to address each element in one long paragraph. That is one way you can structure your response to a comprehending section question, but it's not the only way. Sometimes your response will consist of several small paragraphs instead of one long one. And that brings us to a paragraph break. What is it? A paragraph break is literally what it sounds like. It's the space or break between two paragraphs. In other words, paragraph breaks refers to the art of determining whether to write one long paragraph or several smaller ones. So, how do you know whether you should use a paragraph break or not? How do you know whether you should break a paragraph up into several smaller ones or just keep it as one long one? There's no precise way of answering that question, but in general, you should use a paragraph break whenever you're shifting focus to a different thing. A different thing could be a different perspective, idea, language feature, etc. It will always depend on the question. So this is our general kind of guideline for when we should use paragraph breaks, but more specifically, I want you to ask yourself the following question. Does my completed diagram, step 5 of the planning steps, indicate that I'll need to shift focus to a different thing or things in my response? If you're not shifting focus to a different thing, just write one long paragraph. If you are shifting focus to a different thing, determine how many times you shift focus. If you shift focus once, write 2 mini paragraphs. If you shift focus twice, write 3 mini paragraphs. All of this will make more sense as we return to those 6 examples from the previous lesson. Speaking of the previous lesson, in that lesson on the first 5 planning steps, I told you that we would be addressing addressing the 6th planning step in this lesson. So, what is the relevance of paragraph breaks, what we've just discussed, to the planning steps? As we know, this is the question to ask to determine whether you should use a paragraph break. Does my completed diagram, step 5 of the planning steps, indicate that I'll need to shift focus to a different thing or things in my response? Answering this question is your task in step 6 of the planning steps. Step 6 of the planning steps involves determining structure, and you do this by determining how many paragraphs your response will be. Here's an analogy that ties up everything we've just discussed quite nicely. Imagine each element of TEEL represents a Lego block. This is the topic sentence and thesis, this is the elaboration, this is the example, the explain, and the link. Relevantly, how you use each Lego block depends on whether or not you shift focus to a different thing in your response. Bear that in mind as we look at the past WACE exam questions that we analysed in the previous lesson. Hopefully, what you realise is that in this part of the lesson, we'll be answering step 6 of the planning steps for the plans that we did in the previous lesson. Returning to example 1, the question was explain how the use of setting shapes the construction of one of the characters in this passage. By the way, I'm not going to reread all of the texts that we looked at in the previous lesson. They should be relatively fresh. If you need to refamiliarize yourself with the text that this question relates to, go and do that now and come back once you're done. Similarly, I'm not going to go through all of the planning steps all over again. I'm only going to just do a brief recap on step number 5, which is complete the diagram. This was the diagram we completed. Our 2 elements of the question were use of setting and how that leads to the construction of Delis. The setting of a text consists of its time, place, and mood. We discussed a few things in relation to each of those. And then the construction of Delis, we outlined 2 main points. Delis is set on becoming a housewife instead of seeking career opportunities, and Delis doesn't want to be a part of life outside the small town. Now let's discuss a new step, which is step 6. How should we determine the structure of our response in relation to this question? We know from earlier that the main question we should ask is, does my response shift focus to a different thing? In the case of this example, I would say, yes, the response does shift focus. The next question is, if it does shift focus, how many times? The answer to this question will determine how many mini paragraphs we write. If we shift focus once, we'll write 2 mini paragraphs. If we shift focus twice, we'll write 3 mini paragraphs. I would say the response will shift focus once. It will set focus from set on becoming a housewife instead of seeking career opportunities to doesn't want to be part of life outside the small town. So that is step number 6 done. Here is an answer scaffold that represents how we can use all the information from our completed diagram in an actual response. Pause the video now and have a closer look at this scaffold in the PDF study notes. The main thing to look for is where the information from the completed diagram in step 5 of the planning steps appears in this scaffold. Try and connect the dots. In my plan to the question, I wrote that there are 2 ideas that construct Delis as a character. Set on becoming a housewife up here, and then doesn't want to be part of life outside the small town. There was also different textual evidence supporting each idea. Moving from one idea to the next meant that I would be shifting focus to a different thing. This means a paragraph break right here would be useful. I separated the topic sentence and elaboration up here and the link down here from these 2 main paragraphs to clearly illustrate to the marker where the substance of my analysis is. A final thing to note about this example, we can see the use of the Lego blocks. This column of Lego blocks is quite different from the 5 Lego blocks stacked on top of each other that we saw a few minutes ago. As you can see, I've used these Lego blocks in a slightly different way to suit my response to this question. I've got one thesis statement up here, I've got a topic sentence here, a topic sentence here, then 2 examples, 2 explains, and another 2 examples and another 2 explains to make up this entire response. And of course, we've got the link. And that's how I want you to think about using these Lego blocks. With further examples, you'll start to get a better idea for what I mean by this. That is example number 1 done. Let's take a look at example number 2. Here is a brief recap of the question. Explain how your response to this image has been affected by the arrangement of visual elements within the frame. Here is the relevant image. Pause the video for a bit of a closer look. And here is the diagram that we completed for this question and the related text in the previous lesson. We have the arrangement of visual elements and then how that leads to my response. Regarding the arrangement of visual elements part of the question, we discussed 3. The proximity and how that works with rule of thirds, facial expression and how that works with body language, and symmetrical framing. These visual elements then led to my curious response, and it's curious because I want to know what caused the divide between the two subjects. That is step number 5 that we completed in the last lesson. Now let's look at determine structure, step number 6. We know that we should ask ourselves, does my response shift focus to a different thing? And I would say, no, it doesn't. I'd like you to have a think about why that is, why the response doesn't shift focus to a different thing by looking at this next answer scaffold and take a few minutes to just figure out how the information from step 5 of the planning steps manifests in this answer scaffold, and then consider why I might decide that there's only one paragraph in this response instead of breaking it up into several mini ones. In short, this question requires you to look at the arrangement of visual elements and how that arrangement affects your response. The word arrangement in the question implies that the visual elements are working together to affect my response, rather than separate visual elements individually creating and affecting different responses. Because of this, I decided to structure my response as just one big paragraph. If I added some paragraph breaks to create multiple separate, smaller mini paragraphs, it would disrupt what the question is saying about visual elements working together as an arrangement. That is example number 2. Let's check out example number 3. This is the relevant question. Analyze how text 1 works to convey an idea about human nature. Here's the image. Have a quick skim. Come back once you're done. This was the completed diagram that we did in the previous lesson. We have how, an idea about human nature. How refers to language features, so we're looking at how language features work to convey an idea about human nature. The language features that we identified from the previous lesson were juxtaposition of the framing, composition, lighting, and ratio. We discussed that those different language features then work to convey the following idea about human nature, which is that humans can be so caught up in their own world and miss the bigger picture. I.e., we have Thesis mowing his lawn while there is a tornado behind him. That is our recap of the completed diagram. Now let's discuss the structure. How should we determine the structure of our response to the question? The relevant question we should be asking ourselves to determine the structure is, will my response shift focus to a different thing? Like the previous question, I would say, no, it doesn't. Here's the answer scaffold to the question. Once again, pause the video, read the information from the completed diagram, see how it manifests in this answer scaffold, and try to figure out why I think we don't shift focus and therefore should just have one long paragraph. In short, I've said in my plan, the overarching visual element of juxtaposition works to convey the idea that humans can get so caught up in what they're doing that they can miss the bigger picture. I've also said that visual elements such as framing, composition, lighting, and proportion create that juxtaposition. This is saying that multiple different elements are working together to convey an idea. Because they're working together, I've discussed them in the one paragraph. That's example number 3. We are halfway. Let's move on to example number 4. The question, explain how 3 visual language features in this image engage you in the world of the bodyboarder. You can probably recall what this image is, but here it is anyway. Check it out for a few seconds. Here is the completed diagram for the question that we completed from the previous lesson. It is 3 visual language features and how they lead to the world of the bodyboarder. The 3 main visual language features that we identified were framing, juxtaposition, and camera angle. And we said that those 3 visual language features then lead to, which is indicated through this arrow in the diagram, the world of the bodyboarder, which we have articulated as one that creates a symbiosis between humans and nature. That's our completed diagram, our recap. Now let's determine the structure. Do we shift focus in this response? Yes or no? For this one, I'd say, yeah, we do. Because we do, the next question is, how many times? For this response, we shift focus twice. We shift focus once when we go from framing to juxtaposition, and then we shift focus one more time when we go from juxtaposition to camera angle. Here is what this information in the completed diagram could look like in an answer scaffold. Pause the video, have a look at this scaffold, and try to identify how the information in that completed diagram has manifested in this answer scaffold. Some comments based on what we've discussed about this question. The question specifies we need to discuss 3 visual language features. By discussing one per mini paragraph, we're clearly showing the marker that we're addressing that part of the question. We are shifting focus to a different thing, visual language feature, per paragraph. Importantly, I'm making it known in my response that each separate visual language feature still engages me in the world of the body border, which I've interpreted as one that creates a symbiosis between humans and nature. To explain this a little bit further, I'm saying that framing individually immerses me, engages me in the world of the body border. I'm saying that juxtaposition individually engages me in the world of the body border. And I'm saying that camera angle also individually engages me in the world of the body border. If only all 3 of these features engage me in the world of the body border together, then I would discuss all 3 in the same body paragraph. But because they're all having that individual effect, I can create several mini paragraphs, 1 feature per paragraph. Hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down. 4 examples down, let's do the last 2. Example number 5, show how relationships between people and animals are represented differently in text 2 and 3. If you can't remember what text 2 and 3 are, go and give them a skim from the PDF study notes of the previous lesson, and then just come back once you've read them. Planning for the question continued. This is step number 5 that we did from the previous lesson. We have the relationships between people and animals and how they're represented differently. In text 2, the relationship between people and animals is represented as respectfully distant in light of the human understanding that animals killing other animals is a necessary part of any ecosystem. For text number 3, the relationship between people and animals is represented as obnoxiously interdependent. Those representations are represented differently in the text through the use of different language features. In text 2, we have Australian slang and scientific jargon. In text 3, we have rhetorical questions, balanced sentences, and a euphemism. That is our completed diagram. Now let's figure out the structure. What do you think? Are we shifting focus in this response? Yay or no? Hopefully you were thinking we do. The next question is how many times? And once again, hopefully you were thinking just once. We are shifting focus from the representation of relationships in text 2 to the representation of relationships in text 3. And here is an answer scaffold that represents that shift in focus. As always, pause the video, take a look at the information in the completed diagram and see how it manifests in this answer scaffold. Also, ask yourself, why are we shifting focus once? Some comments based on this answer scaffold. I've discussed how each text represents the relationship between people and animals in 2 paragraphs. 1 main paragraph here and 1 main paragraph here. A paragraph break was used to split both texts because the relationships are represented differently. There's a shift in focus. This is an important point. Because I've analyzed each text separately, here, and this question is a comparison question, I would need to emphasize in this little paragraph up here and this little one down here with the link, how the relationships are represented differently. Remember, in these paragraphs, this main one here and this main one here, I'm just saying how each one is represented. So I'd need to explain in here and here how they're represented differently. I'd need to do that in order to satisfy this part of the question. Moving on to our 6th and final example, it is compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in text 1 and text 2. One last time, if you can't remember these texts, go and read them from the PDF study notes in the previous lesson. This is our completed diagram from the previous lesson. We have similar ideas about swimming and how they lead to how each idea is constructed. The idea about swimming in text 1 is swimming in public pools, despite its challenge, is a convenient way to take refuge from the Australian heat. And the idea about swimming in text 2 is swimming is a graceful, meditative, and challenging act. The idea in text 1 was constructed through the use of binary language, balanced sentence, connotative language. The idea in text 2 was constructed through figurative language, long syntax interspersed with short syntax. One final time, let's determine the structure of this response. Does it shift focus? I would say it does. Next question is, how many times? And hopefully we're on the same page here. Shifts focus once. It shifts focus from the similar idea about swimming in text 1 to the similar idea about swimming in text 2. Here's an answer scaffold to represent the information in that completed diagram. Pause the video now, ask yourself the following question. Where does the information from the completed diagram in step 5 manifest in this answer scaffold? Some comments. The word compare in the question means look at the similarities and or differences. The similar idea about swimming part of the question means one idea from each text that says something similar but not the exact same about swimming. My main mini paragraphs, this one here and this one here, compare how each text treats, the word treats just means using language features to convey, a good aspect of swimming, which is what this mini paragraph discusses, and a bad aspect of swimming, which is what this mini paragraph discusses. In other words, the two main paragraphs shift focus to different things. The first main paragraph discusses the good aspects of swimming that are discussed in text 1 and 2. Then the second main paragraph discusses the bad aspects of swimming that are addressed in text 1 and text 2. Then my comparison focuses on the differences in how each text uses language features to convey the good aspects of swimming and the bad aspects of swimming. And that is all there is to it when it comes to structuring your response to a comprehending section question. Let's go through a simple summary of what we've just learned. For the first part of the lesson, we looked at the elements of TEEL. Those elements are, firstly, topic sentence, thesis statement, elaboration, example, explain, link. From there, we looked at the importance of the explain part of TEEL. The relevant key takeaway for this part of the lesson was that the explain part of a TEEL analytical paragraph is where most marks are awarded because it is where most of the analyzing is done. We learned in this part of the lesson that you can demonstrate to a WACE marker your understanding that the explain part of TEEL is most important by apportioning most words in the paragraph to the explain. Next main part of the lesson was the guiding principle of structuring a response in the comprehending section, and that guiding principle is paragraph breaks. Our definition of a paragraph break is the space or break between two paragraphs. That is literally what a paragraph break is, but really a paragraph break is the art of determining whether to write one long paragraph or several smaller ones. This led us to a discussion on how you should determine whether you should use a paragraph break. Key takeaway here, you should use a paragraph break whenever you're shifting focus to a different thing. Ask yourself, does my completed diagram, which is step 5 of the planning steps, indicate that I'll need to shift focus to a different thing or things in my response? If you're not going to be shifting focus, just write one long paragraph. And if you are, determine how many times you shift focus and then structure your response accordingly. For example, if you shift focus once, write 2 main paragraphs. If you shift focus twice, write 3 main paragraphs. You get the idea. We then related all of this discussion about paragraph breaks to the planning steps. In short, answering the question above, does my response shift focus? And if so, how many times? That is your task in step 6 of the planning steps. Answering that question is how you determine your structure of your response. We also introduced a bit of an analogy, and that analogy is each element of TEEL represents a Lego block. Relevantly, how you use each Lego block depends on whether or not you shift focus to a different thing in your response. As you saw in all the examples, we're using these Lego blocks of TEEL in different ways to suit our needs for the question, to suit our response to the specific question that we're answering. There's no cookie cutter approach, so we use the Lego blocks to build our own response that matches what the question is asking us to do. Then for the rest of the lesson, we just looked at the past WACE exam questions, those 6 examples that we looked at in the previous lesson. Example number 1 was explain how the use of setting shapes the construction of one of the characters in this passage. Here we saw we just shifted focus once from one aspect of Delis's characterization to another. Example number 2 was explain how your response to this image has been affected by the arrangement of visual elements within the frame. Here, we didn't shift focus. The word arrangement in the question implies that the visual elements are working together, so it therefore lends itself to one big paragraph. Example number 3 was analyze how text 1 works to convey an idea about human nature. Once again, we didn't shift focus. We didn't shift focus because multiple elements worked together to convey an idea about human nature. Example number 4 was explain how 3 visual language features in this image engage you in the world of the bodyboarder. In this question, we did shift focus and we shifted focus twice from one visual language feature to the second and to the third. Shifting focus twice meant we had 3 main paragraphs. Example number 5, show how relationships between people and animals are represented differently in text 2 and text 3. For this question, we just shifted focus once from the representation of relationships in text 2 to the representation of relationships in text 3. Last but not least, example number 6, compare how a similar idea about swimming is treated in text 1 and text 2. Did we shift focus? We did, and we shifted focus once. From the similar idea in text 1 to the similar idea in text 2. That is all for today's lesson. As you might expect, the PDF activities for this lesson require you to complete the 6th and final step of the planning steps in relation to the questions you planned for from the previous lesson. They'll also get you to create some answer scaffolds for each question. Note, you wouldn't be expected to create answer scaffolds like these in an exam purely because you just don't have enough time. So why am I getting you to create those scaffolds? The purpose of creating the scaffolds is to learn how to structure and use the information that you create in step 5 of the planning steps. A final thing, all the examples we just looked at were obviously typed, and as you know, you'll be handwriting on the day of the exam. So if you'd like to see what a handwritten plan that follows the planning steps looks like, check out the page that comes after the activity objectives for this lesson. That is all from me. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Until then, keep it simple.